So I wanted to dovetail into what I talked about on the grass. And by the way, that football field analogy, maybe I was over exaggerating, but when I think football field, I think astroturf, green, and that just makes me think, especially in large numbers. But when you fillet open the digestive tract, you probably have a football field would be about equal to four people all filleted open as far as the digestive tube. So, but it doesn't make sense if I say it's one person's equal to like a tennis court. It doesn't, I like the analogy. Anyway, so the bottom line, I wanted to show you a couple things. If you watched my previous videos, you'll know that I always try to change my probiotics every 4 months. The rule of thumb for me nowadays is every 4 months, you have some probiotic that has at least four different bacterias, at least 4 billion CFUs, and at least less than $40. So this is the current one that I'm taking, refrigerated. I'm not sure if you could read that, but there's essentially more than four, but it's essentially lactobacilli and bifidobacter as far as the organisms. This is my old one that I use. I usually take this out during times of inflammation because of the nice reduction, and especially with COVID, you never know, but nice reduction in inflammatory cytosomes. So this is the DGL slippery elm and the marshmallow root that I use to provide a viscous barrier. And if you watch my previous videos, I think I mentioned the barrier is dependent on one of the studies that I showed last time. These are the small intestine cells. These are villi that project out into the lumen of the tube, and then that way as the food passes through, these little finger-like projections take all the nutrient out of the lumen's contents, the vomit. So eventually, when there's no more nutrient to take out of the vomit, it turns into poop. So that's what happens. And then the poop or the unused, unabsorbed stuff gets into the colon. The colon feeds the bacteria. Bacteria, the microbiome, which is what I wanted to talk about. I mentioned it on the mountain. And here's a nice illustration of what happens in the microbiome, especially when it comes to obesity. So I already mentioned the villi, and I did mention that between each cell, you'll have a tight junction. It's supposed to be tight. But in many cases, it's not tight because of chronic inflammation, whether it's poor combination of microbiota, or it's no mucus, no biofilm to house the microbiota, or it's just ransacked because of too many antibiotics. Whatever it is, the tight junctions are not tight anymore. So you can see that these tight junctions between two cells are open and everything comes through, and then you manifest inflammatory reaction. Now, if you have really good, and you'll notice this model is obese because there's inflammatory reaction that turns on a cascade of a whole bunch of bad things. Now, if you have very good microbiota, if you have very good biofilm, tight junction, super tight, skinny person, no inflammation, none of the triggers that go this way, and you have nice organs. So that's how I perceive the usefulness of taking care of and pampering the gut. So if you have autoimmune disease, Hashimoto's, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, even if you have Alzheimer's disease, or just symptoms of brain fog, irritable bowel syndrome, overactive, underactive thyroid, some people would even say anxiety and depression, I think the gut is a very good starting place, especially if you're not sure which way to go. So if we can treat the gut properly, sometimes going to what's called a FODMAPs diet is really restrictive, but some people have to because they're so screwed up. But it probably is partially due to me and my colleagues given so many medicines. Here's a nice study by Mahoney about the use of steroids and how he found that steroids will change. Steroids in the form of prednisone or steroids in the form of estrogen and testosterone, depending on the person, can change the gut microbiome. So if you change the gut microbiome, depending on if you're going to menopause or if you have low testosterone, menopause, or if you're being given stuff, synthetic, you can actually change the existence of the different bacteria in the gut. Now, when you look at what happens, I think this had 4 billion. This had 15 billion CFUs. Remember, my rules are 4, just because I can remember 4. 15 billion. That's not that much. Even VSL double strength number 3, that's like 300 billion. That's still not that much. If you think you have a couple trillion in your belly, 300 billion is not that much. So if you just shower your gut with consistent change up bacterias, probiotics, I think eventually what happens is the gang that you have, the microbiome, will allow certain probiotics to come in depending on the type that you're taking. And most of them last about 2 months. So that's why I go through 2 bottles, 2 months, 4 months, every 4 months change. 4 bacterias every 4 months, at least 4 billion and $40. So now there's recent data on this one particular bacteria. I still like Saccharomyces because of its reduction in IL-6 and other inflammatory cytokines. However, the new guy on the block data-wise is Akkermansia, and this can be measured. So there's you can't do it in a regular stool culture that you do at a regular hospital. I'm trying to figure out which company can do it for us, but you'll have to send it away and it'll probably not be covered by insurance. However, there's nice data that shows that it's mostly from Kyoto, Japan. I think it's Japan, that they found people with low levels of Akkermansia usually translated to high level of disease. Several different diseases, but this seems to be a really good bacteria to have, at least have a lot of. But the studies are ongoing, and there are even studies on how to maximize on the amount of Akkermansia. Now, if you have good Akkermansia, I'm sure you'll have, if you can get that test done, I'm sure you'll be able to have all the other good guys, Bifido, Lacto, Saccharomyces. But if you can have a wide plethora, a lot of good guys, then there's going to be you'll choke off the food supply for the bad guys, C. diff, fungi, candida, even viruses. You choke off the blood supply or the food supply because you just have a plethora of different good bacteria sitting in that mucousy lining that's on top of the finger-like projections. And it's kind of like feeding your lawn fertilizer so that it gets super thick and there's no room for crabgrass to grow. And then if it gets super thick, just like that field that was behind me, I have to do a tick check because I just got home and I'm sure I was in that field long enough for a tick to come up. Anyway, if you just have a plethora of different things in the field, none of the bad stuff will grow up. So that's the thinking. So there are strategies. One of the strategies, which is very interesting, was to use antibiotics. Certain antibiotics seem to blossom Akkermansia, and I'm sure with other good bacteria. So vancomycin, doxycycline, hydroxychloroquine, the one that President Trump is really touting. So there's a bunch of different antibiotics, almost like the treatment of SIBO. SIBO is where you have it's small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And the theory with that, because it leads to the same symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome, bloating, the digestion's poor, constipation to diarrhea alternating, pain. One of the treatments is to slam the body with antibiotic, special one, and then after that rebuild the gut. So concept is good. You nuke the playing field and you just try to put some growing seeds in to grow. Pretty tough though to tolerate. So hopefully you're not that extreme. But also what was really interesting, metformin was also used. So those of you who are diabetics, some of my bodybuilders are using metformin to push the envelope with growth. Metformin seems to make Akkermansia grow. So that's cool. In addition to pushing a bunch of polyphenols. Rhubarb in particular is being studied, but this was essentially a review of 25 other studies, interventional dietary studies. So nice collection. Again, statement is there. Bacteria are good. And prebiotics are good. Biofilm is good. If you have all that stuff, you should be okay. Close off those tight junctions, reverse inflammation. It might even reverse brain fog and IBS. So, and finally, the data out of Hong Kong says finally, as that picture I showed you, the fat guy or the fat person versus the skinny person, there is a link to decreasing inflammation and having decreased obesity. So I think it's worth it to read into. It's worth it to consider. I mean, what's the big deal? Just try to take a probiotic, try to put some, one of these studies, by the way, put some fibers and polyphenols. One of these studies showed that high fat diet seemed to decrease Akkermansia too, using Akkermansia as the easiest bacteria to measure with positive results, at least out of Kyoto, like I mentioned. Yeah, high fat might not be good, and that's keto. As check out my keto video I just did, I was feeling terrible. And high amounts of polyphenols, almost like that low FODMAP diet. So there's going to be the need for fiber, whether you get the fiber in acacia or pomegranate or this stuff, psyllium husk. I think a wide variety of different fibers will present that slipperiness. And then once you have the slipperiness, you got the house. It's only a matter of time before you get success. So hopefully this gives you a couple of ideas. If you have any questions, put them in the comments down below. Otherwise, I'll see you at the next video.